Hi, I'm Frank and welcome to my woodturning channel. A couple of months ago, I rough turned some black cherry crotch pieces and I put them in my kiln, and now it's been a couple of months later and they're dried, so I'm just going to take them out and see how they look, and we'll finish some of those off. Here's one that has a few little cracks right in here, and there's one crack here, but that's not too bad. I think we can fix that without any problem. Here's a small one, and it doesn't have any cracks on the back at all, but it has a little bit here. Again, nothing too major. I think we can deal with that without any problem. So this is the largest one, and this is what I was hoping for here. This side here hasn't cracked at all, and you can still see the figure through here. And this is the back of the piece, and it just has a tiny little crack right here. So I think we'll be able to deal with all of that without any problems. I'm going to start the project by using a jam chuck, and then once I bring a tailstock up, I can have this piece turning and I can true up the tenon and start to turn the back. I'm just using a 5/8 inch bowl gouge to clean up the bottom of this heart-shaped bowl. And then near the tenon, I will also use a skew on its side. And in this particular case, I'm going to use a dovetail tenon. This very outer area is a bit trickier just because it's an interrupted cut, but just a nice steady gouge movement through that area should do a good job. There are some cracks here that need to be filled with sawdust and some CA glue. So now I'm doing some final cuts on the bottom surface with a little bit smaller gouge, and it's been sharpened so it's nice and fresh and should leave me the best possible surface. The cracks need to be filled again, so I'm just going to use some spray shellac on here just to avoid the CA glue seeping into the other part of the wood. And this time I'm going to just use the black CA filler because there's so many cracks in this thing. I'm just going to, at the very end, paint some trees on here and hope to disguise most of those cracks. Once the CA glue is dried, I'm just going to use a negative rake scraper to take off those little high spots where the glue is. So my scraper seems a little dull, so I'm just going to pick up a carbide burnisher and then burnish the edge, and that just raises the burr on that tool. So I can use that for a little bit more. I can do that once or twice, and then I still have to go back to the grinder eventually. With everything finished and sanded up on the back, I'm now going to turn things around, and we're going to turn out the inside of the bowl to final thickness. I'm just turning the very outside edge a little bit at a time until I get to its final thickness that I want. And first I'm going to start with this roughing gouge, which is 5/8 inch gouge. And then a little bit later on I'm just going to use a smaller gouge that's sharp and do a final cut with it. This is now my final 1/2 inch gouge, and I'm doing really nice light little cut to get off all the little ridges as best I can. Now to finish off the bottom area, I'm going to use this bottoming bowl gouge. This is made by Hunter Tools. I also have one by Hamlet. So I kind of use them interchangeably. This time I'm going to try this one. It's a bit tricky to use, but it gives a really nice finish off on the bottom surface like this if you can sort of master it. Just like on the outside surface, I'm going to use a negative rake scraper to just clean up any little ridges or lines or grooves that was left over from the gouge. And now the surface will be fully sanded from 120 grit to 320 grit. And that's typically all I do for a bowl like this. If it's a finer piece of work, I might go to 400 grit. You can see I have to stop the lathe, lock it, and then do some of these areas without the lathe spinning. Now we're moving on to the other shape of crotch wood. This one is going to be flat and thin, and basically will be just a very large charcuterie board. I've had to use my other lathe. This is my Laguna lathe with the outboard extension. That allows me to turn a much larger radius because this is over 25 inches. It's probably about 28 or 29 inches peak to peak. So here what I'm doing is just cleaning off what will be the top surface of the charcuterie board. And this way I know how thin to make the other side because everything will be trued up on this side. So when I turn the back side, it'll be a little more obvious how thick to turn it everywhere. There's a lot of interrupted cuts here. It's circular in the area where I'm turning right now, but as I get further out, it's very much an interrupted cut. So it's just a little trickier to get a good surface there. Sometimes I'm using push cuts, sometimes I'm using pull cuts, sometimes I'm cutting in the wrong direction like I am here. Just trying different things to see what gives me the best surface and what's the easiest to cut this very large piece. I'm cutting the proper direction here, but now I've had to change and go the other direction. It's just getting really hard to come off that surface. So nice slow cut with the sharp tool. I'm kind of getting away with it. And here again I'm going to use the negative rake scraper to take off any little lines. The turning has uncovered a bit of a void in the middle of this piece, which totally was not visible. So I'll see if I can manage to work around it or what. I'm just afraid it might punch through the other side when I'm finishing the top. So in the end, I think I'm just going to fill this with some epoxy to make sure that the other side doesn't come through. So here I am mixing up some epoxy. I'm just going to use black epoxy. And I'm not going to put a dam on the back of it. I just need enough epoxy in there so that it basically will fill the front face here. Now on this side here, I'm just going to take off the tape and glue. So the glue from a glue gun comes off relatively easy once you sort of douse it with some denatured alcohol. And there it is. You can see the top surface of the epoxy. And I'm just going to clean that up now. Somehow I forgot to record the footage of hollowing out this, but it's just a small little bowl area there. So once it's hollowed out, I've turned this around, and now I've finished off the base and do the final sanding on it. The piece didn't particularly have an awful lot of cracks, but I decided to put a nice tree here using pen and ink. First I draw the tree in pencil and then fill it in with pen and ink pens that artists use. I'm going to use general salad bowl finish on these pieces. First I brush the bark area with a brush, and then the rest of it is just used with a wipe on, wipe off approach. There's the first coat. It brought out the figure really nicely in these pieces. And I ended up doing 2 or 3 coats on these. Stay tuned for some pictures.